William Walker Atkinson's The New Psychology. Its message, principles, and practice. Chapter 17 was mental suggestion. This is Chapter 18, autosuggestion. An autosuggestion is a mental suggestion made to oneself by oneself. It is a case of, says I to myself, says I. And, strange to say, the effect of the thought of oneself, shaped into words and directed to oneself, is charged with a dynamic force far in excess of the same thought merely held in the mind and not so expressed. Strange, isn't it? There is added to an expressed thought a something dynamic, vital, forceful, and active that is absent from the thought that is merely held in the mind. The expression imparts a vital force to the thought that it did not possess before. And this is true in cases in which the expression is made to oneself, as well as when it is made to others. The same law is evoked. A latent thought is static. An expressed thought is dynamic, and therein lies the force and value of autosuggestion. In the various cults of the New Thought, we have heard much regarding holding the thought, which means that an idea constantly kept before the mind has a tendency to materialize into outward reality and expression, and this is very well in its way, and is based upon psychological principles, but there is a more active force in thought, which was at first overlooked, but not for long. The followers of the New Thought teachings soon began to hear much regarding affirmations, statements, declarations, and the like. These statements, etc., were modeled upon the ancient Hindu mantras or sacred statements, and were held to be very efficacious in producing results. To many, these methods seemed either ridiculous or else weird and mysterious, according to the viewpoint of the observer. But the students of the new psychology see nothing ridiculous in these statements, although often the exaggeration of the statement verges upon the ridiculous. And they see nothing weird or mysterious in the procedure either, for they recognized the working of their old friend suggestion, or rather, autosuggestion, in these methods. It is simply another case of the added force of expressed thought. Another instance of, says I to myself, says I, and with the natural result. The student of the new psychology sees in all of the various forms of new thought statements, affirmations, declarations, all autosuggestions, in fact, the working of this law of expressed thought in its effect upon the subconscious mentality. He sees in each statement of, I am this or I am that, an expressed idea directed to one's own subconsciousness, there to be recorded and preserved, just as are the impressions of outside suggestions. The man who starts out by saying, I am courageous, in the right spirit, and who keeps pegging away at the same autosuggestion day after day, always, however, keeping the spirit in the words, cannot escape changing his subconscious mentality in accordance with his statements. Excuse me. He will make his statements come true if he goes about it in the right way and persists in the right spirit. And, likewise, the man who is always saying, the world is against me, I am a failure, and repeating the statement to himself over and over, day after day, will surely create for himself such a mental attitude and a personality as will inevitably tend to make of him what he is stating that he is. To those who have not looked into the matter carefully, there is a tendency to decry the value of these self-statements, particularly after witnessing some extreme instance in the person of some fanatical follower of the cults. He is apt to smile at the whole matter and dismiss it with a, there's nothing to it. But let the same man seriously contemplate the results of some of his friends starting in a course of, I am a failure, this line of autosuggestions, in earnest and repeatedly, Let him imagine such an occurrence, and he will readily say, "Why, that would ruin a fellow in no time." He would see the application of the negative autosuggestions in a moment. Well, the same rule applies in both cases. It is a poor rule that will not work both ways. Leaving out of the question the absurd extravagances of some of the cults, it is a psychological fact that a line of positive autosuggestions, intelligently applied and faithfully kept up, will surely produce changes in the character, personality, and mental quality of the person making them. It is possible for one literally to make himself over, mentally, by an intelligent course of autosuggestion. To all of the methods and exercises given in this book for the mastery and control of the mental faculties by the will of the ego, there may well be added the use of autosuggestions along the same lines. The plan of talking up to one's mental faculties works like a charm, for it is but the adding of dynamic force to the idea. It is a form of expression into activity. You may hold the thought that you are going to say no to a question or proposition that you know will be submitted to you during the day. You may make up your mind firmly to take the necessary position and attitude. But when you say to yourself, in actual words, "I shall say no," and stick to it no matter what happens, saying it in a tone conveying positive conviction and determination, then you have done much to clinch the matter. And if you will add to this a mental picture of yourself saying and acting in accordance therewith, you will have done much to make a mental path easy to follow. That is what the autosuggestion does. It makes a mental path. It establishes a habit line of action. And you know what that means if you have read this book. In some of my writings, I have recommended that the person making the autosuggestion not only content himself with saying "I am" or "I will do" such and so, but also talk up to himself, calling himself by name, and saying, "See here, John Smith, you are going to do such and so," or "You are such and so." This plan brings into effect the positive character of actual suggestion from outside, suggestion of authority. One may, in this way, use all the methods of mental suggestion upon himself, and obtain the benefits that arise from positive suggestions from good authorities. One may order himself to be what he wills himself to be, along the lines of autosuggestion, with good results. For what is this autosuggestion, after all, if not the assertion of the ego of its mastery and control over its mental states, the creation of new mental states, the building up of new characteristics, powers, and personality. The ego is the suggester of the autosuggestion when properly used. It is right along with the other teachings of the new psychology. Every person is largely what he is by reason of the things that he has said about himself, or else acquiesced in when others have said them about him. He has been filling himself with autosuggestion since he was a small child, and his subconsciousness is filled with these impressions and is constantly passing them up to the field of consciousness and manifesting them in action. Just as the suggestions of others have registered themselves and then played their part in character building, so have the opinions expressed about oneself had much to do with the formation of one's character. Of course, people are not always that which they say to themselves that they are. Nevertheless, the latter has had its formative effect and creative action. And, after all, a man does not always say to himself, about himself, that which he says to others about himself. You will find that many a man does not hold himself as highly as his outward statements would indicate. Many a blusterer has said to himself when alone, "Smith, you are a coward and a fool." And the autosuggestion was impressed upon his mind according to the degree of belief in it. A man does considerable talking to himself, although his words may never be spoken aloud. He forms his thoughts into words, often, and says them to himself just as truly as if he were to speak them aloud. And these things have an effect upon him. It is not wise to admit a weakness to oneself. It is all very well to preserve an honesty and integrity toward oneself as well as toward others, but one should avoid the I can't self-confession as much as possible. One should treat his mind as if it were capable of great things, and as if it were going to improve and increase its efficiency. Never give your mind autosuggestions of a negative nature, any more than you would give them to someone in your employ from whom you expected to get good work. Set your mind aside as an employee or a helper. As an employee, or a helper. And know your ego as yourself. Then say and do toward your mind the things that you would do toward your employee. Tell it what you want done, what results you expect it to accomplish, and in other ways treat it as does the wise employer in the case of an efficient employee. Don't abuse it, of course, although a good straight talking to will not be amiss at times. Never tell it that it is worthless, but always hold up to it the ideal of better things that are possible to it, and that you expect from it. All of this may seem absurd to those who are not acquainted with the psychological principles involved. It is a matter of the employment and treatment of the subconscious mentality, first, last, and all the time. It is bringing to your aid those tiny workers of the subconscious region who are ready to work for you, if only you will instruct them and inform them of what you want done. Those who have studied the previous chapters of this book should experience no difficulty in understanding the reasons behind the phenomena of autosuggestion. And now that you have had your attention directed toward the subject, you will be able to explain to your own satisfaction much that may have perplexed you in the affirmations, statements, declarations, etc. of the cults. There is nothing weird or mysterious about the matter, except that everything about the mind is mysterious, at the last. It is but the application of the power of the ego over the subconscious regions of its mental kingdom. Chapter 19 will be Mind and Body.